I called out my MIL for manipulating our wedding, then found out she was literally shopping for a new fiancé for my fiancé. I'm 30 years old, and I'm engaged to my fiancé, Mark, who's 31. We're getting married in 6 months, and while I should be floating on clouds with excitement, I'm instead juggling wedding planning, full-time work, and the increasingly suffocating influence of my future mother-in-law. Mark's family is wealthy, old money, very traditional, very country club. I come from a more middle-class background, so I always knew there'd be differences, but I didn't expect how much those differences would press down on our wedding plans. Mark's father, my future father-in-law, is reserved. He's the kind of man who listens a lot and speaks selectively, and while he's not overly affectionate or involved, he doesn't come off as controlling either. His wife, on the other hand, my future mother-in-law, is an entirely different story. She's always been a lot. She micromanages everything in Mark's life, from what he wears to how often he calls her. At first, I thought it was just your standard over-involved mother, but the deeper we got into wedding planning, the more it became clear this woman doesn't just want to be part of the process. She wants to run it. Things really exploded when we found our venue. Mark and I had spent weeks looking at places that felt right to us, something unique, something that had character and told a story. And then we stumbled upon this old, restored theater downtown. It was stunning. Exposed brick, velvet seats, antique fixtures, and this romantic bohemian vibe that we both fell head over heels for. It was a bit quirky, a little off the beaten path, but it just felt like us. Yes, it was pricier than some of the more traditional venues, but we'd crunched the numbers and figured out how to make it work if we tightened up in other areas. And we were excited, genuinely excited. Then came the reveal to Mark's parents. We were having brunch at their house, a place that feels like it belongs in an architectural magazine, and after the Eggs Benedict, we broke the news about the theater. Mark was beaming, showing pictures on his phone, explaining how we'd already envisioned the layout, where the altar would be, where people would sit. His dad just kind of nodded, said something like, "Sounds different," and went back to sipping his coffee. His mother, though? She visibly recoiled. I kid you not, her face contorted like we told her we were getting married in a gas station parking lot. "A theater?" she said slowly, like she needed to make sure she'd heard it right. "Downtown." She made a face. "I'm not sure how that will work for the guests. Parking will be a nightmare." Mark tried to reassure her. "There's a garage next door. And we're arranging valet." She waved her hand, dismissive. "Still. And what about the acoustics?" I had imagined a string quartet for the ceremony. "We weren't really planning on a quartet," I said, trying to stay polite. "That opened the floodgates. But a string quartet is classic. You'll want something timeless, something elegant. And the lighting in those old places can be so unflattering, especially for pictures. And will it even have the right facilities for the caterers?" I could feel my heart rate rising, but I smiled and said, "We've checked. The venue has everything we need." She looked unconvinced. And then, just like that, she pivoted into what she probably thought was a generous peace offering. "Well," she began, folding her hands like she was chairing a board meeting, "your father and I were, of course, hoping you'd consider the country club." Of course. The country club. The same one she and my father-in-law were married at. The same one where every family event is held. The one where she practically lives. "It's just such a lovely venue," she continued, "and so convenient for our friends." I started to speak, but she held up a hand, like she hadn't finished her pitch. "But," she said, with an exaggerated sigh of martyrdom, "we understand it's your day. And if the theater is what you've chosen," she paused dramatically, "then we want to support you." Here it came. "We know the theater venue is significantly more expensive than what we had in mind," she said, glancing pointedly at Mark. "So, we'd like to offer a contribution. A substantial one. Enough to cover 40% of the venue costs." Mark lit up. "Wow. Really?" It sounded generous. On paper, it was generous. But I've learned something about his mother in the past few years. Nothing she gives comes without expectations. Her gifts are like contracts, unspoken, tightly binding, and always weighted in her favor. I looked at Mark, then at her. She was watching me carefully, that smile she wears when she thinks she's won forming slowly on her face. I swallowed and said, "That's very kind of you, but we've got it covered. We're happy with the budget we've set, and we're okay to make the necessary trade-offs." "Thank you, though." There was a beat of silence, and then she smiled again, but this time, it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well," she said, tone clipped, "if you change your mind, the offer stands." Just know we're only trying to help." At first, I stood my ground. I told myself I wouldn't take the money, not because we didn't need it, but because I knew better. I knew the way my future mother-in-law operates. But then she looked at me with this tight, forced smile, the kind she puts on when she's trying to pretend she's not angry. Her voice dropped to that falsely sweet tone she uses when she's about to double down. "Nonsense, darling," she said. "A wedding should be a celebration, not a financial stressor. We want to do this for you." She kept going, saying things like, "It's a gift." Really? No expectations, no conditions. My father-in-law chimed in too, nodding gravely as if to lend weight to her words. "It's a genuine wedding gift. No strings attached," he said. Mark, poor sweet Mark, lit up like a Christmas tree. He turned to them, positively glowing, and said, "Thank you so much. You're both amazing. This really helps." And just like that, I felt the walls close in. I was cornered, sitting there at that painfully elegant dining table, watching my fiancé practically bursting with gratitude, while I felt my stomach twist into knots. My instincts were screaming, "Don't do this," but what could I say at that moment without looking ungrateful or paranoid? So I smiled, a tight, fake smile of my own, and I said, "Okay, thank you." But the second we left their house that night, I couldn't shake the unease. It didn't take long for my fears to be confirmed. Not even 3 days later, I got the first email from her, subject line, "Beautiful florist." Inside was a link to some high-end floral designer who, surprise, surprise, only worked with certain exclusive venues, including, of course, the country club. I responded with a polite "thanks, we'll consider it," even though we'd already booked a small, indie florist downtown whose work we loved. Then came more links. Cake vendors who don't deliver downtown. Decor ideas that screamed classic ballroom and made absolutely no sense for the warm, moody charm of our theater space. She started talking about stationery options that would complement the country club's color scheme. When I gently reminded her, again, that the wedding was at the theater, she'd blink like she'd forgotten and say something like, "Oh, right. Well, maybe they'd make an exception for you." Or, "It's just so much easier when vendors already know the venue." Easier for her, maybe. I vented to Mark. He told me to let it slide. "She's just excited," he said. "She's trying to help." "Mark," I said, "she's not forgetting. She's not confused. She's ignoring our plans." I should have drawn the line then, but I didn't. Then last night happened. We were invited over for dinner, another overly formal sit-down meal that felt more like a weekly performance than a family gathering. I was already bracing myself for the usual barrage of passive-aggressive jabs and veiled suggestions, but nothing could have prepared me for what she dropped next. Over dessert, lavender panna cotta, of course, she said it. "So," she began, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, "about the ceremony flow at the theater. I was thinking it might be easier to have the reception at the country club after. Just the reception, you know, for dancing and easier bar service." I blinked. I waited for someone else to speak. No one did. It was like the air got sucked out of the room. And then I snapped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't throw my napkin down or storm out. But I looked her straight in the eye, locked eyes with her across that picture-perfect table, and said, as calmly and firmly as I could manage, "With all due respect, this stops now." She blinked, startled. "We chose the theater because we love it," I said. "Because it feels like us. You told us the money was a gift, no strings attached, but that wasn't true, was it? You didn't give us that money to help us have our day. You gave it to try and manipulate us into having your day. This wedding is not a redo of your wedding. It's not a family PR event. It's our wedding." The table went dead silent. My father-in-law looked like someone had slapped him. He set down his fork and stared at his plate, stunned. Mark, oh Mark. He was completely caught off guard. His mouth was slightly open, and he looked between me and his mother like he couldn't process what had just happened. Then, slowly, his expression darkened. His brows knit together, his jaw clenched, and I saw it. Anger. And Miles' face crumbled in slow motion. 1 second she was stone-faced, lips pressed in that familiar line of disapproval. The next, her mouth was trembling, her voice cracking as she burst into tears right there at the table. "How could you be so cruel?" she gasped through sobs. "We were only trying to help. We've done nothing but support you. This is how you treat us." She clutched at her napkin like it was some lifeline, dabbing at her eyes in that over-the-top, performative way that made my stomach churn. I didn't say anything. I was too stunned, too exhausted. too done. But Mark stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor. What the hell, my name? He barked. You massively overstepped. You just insulted my parents in their own home and completely ruined the evening. I blinked at him, mouth open in disbelief. I'm sorry, what? He wasn't done. His hands were clenched at his sides, shaking. You're being paranoid. They made a generous offer. You've been looking for a reason to paint them as villains from the start. You were rude and disrespectful and totally uncalled for. This is supposed to be a happy time, and instead, he gestured at the crying mess his mother had become. You just blew it up. My whole body felt cold, like the shock had numbed me from the inside out. We left not long after that. No dessert. No goodbyes. Just an awkward, silent departure while Emile sobbed into her napkin and Ephile stood stiffly behind her, glaring like I'd just sucker-punched their family dog. Mark didn't speak to me in the car. Didn't even look at me. Just drove home in silence, jaw tight, hands white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole time. When we got back to the apartment, I tried. I really, truly tried. I waited a while, gave him space, let him change out of his blazer, let him slam a few cabinets in the kitchen before finally sitting down beside him and saying softly, "Can we talk about what happened?" He didn't look at me. You embarrassed me, he said flatly. You embarrassed them. You made my mother cry. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone, Mark. I was trying to set a boundary. He scoffed. That wasn't a boundary. That was an attack. I swallowed, trying to stay calm. I've been telling you for weeks that I was feeling uncomfortable with how involved your mom was getting. I've been telling you that it felt like she was trying to push us toward her ideal wedding, not ours. You kept brushing it off like I was imagining things. She was trying to help, he insisted. That money was a gift. She said it over and over again. She was excited. She wanted to feel included. You took all of that and twisted it into something ugly. I sat there, feeling a mixture of heartbreak and disbelief. So, what, I'm just supposed to let her take over? Smile and nod while she tries to turn our wedding into her event? Pretend it's all fine just because she's crying now? Mark finally turned to face me. His eyes were hard. You owe her an apology. My throat tightened. And what about me? Do you think maybe I deserve one too? He shook his head slowly, like I was missing the point. If you can't be respectful to my family, then maybe we need to rethink things. And there it was. That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the man I was supposed to marry in 6 months, the man I thought knew me better than anyone, and realized I was looking at a stranger. That was 2 days ago. Since then, we've barely spoken. We pass each other in the apartment like polite roommates. Mark has been texting his mom constantly. I know because I've caught glimpses of the notifications on his phone. I'm guessing he's been doing damage control, apologizing on my behalf, reassuring her that he still sees her as the victim here. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with this awful, gnawing sense of doubt. Not about what I said, because deep down, I do still believe I was right, but about how I said it. About whether I should have waited. Said it in private. Let her push and prod and passive-aggressively undermine our plans a few more weeks before finally drawing the line. I keep wondering if I let my emotions get the better of me. If I let the tension and resentment build up too long, until it all exploded in the worst possible way. And I keep asking myself, was I too harsh? Too defensive? Should I have just kept my mouth shut, taken the money, and ignored the suggestions? But every time I try to convince myself of that, I picture the look in Emile's eyes when I first told her no, the tight smile, the patronizing tone, the way she pretended to forget our venue over and over again. That wasn't love. That wasn't support. That was control, dressed up as generosity. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Still, the silence is killing me. Then, yesterday, I found out something that broke me in a way I wasn't prepared for. A friend of mine, someone I've known since college, someone who would never stir up drama without reason, texted me. She said she saw Mark. He was having lunch with another woman at this upscale cafe near the edge of town. She didn't recognize the woman, but the body language? It didn't read friendly. It read intimate. Too comfortable. Too close. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was innocent. Maybe it was someone from work. A cousin. A family friend. I wish to God it had been. But my gut wouldn't let it go. Something had been off between us ever since the night at his parents' house. The distance. The defensiveness. The way he'd started locking his phone. So I asked him. I waited until we were both home, until he'd taken off his coat, and sat down like it was any other day. I looked him in the eye and I asked, calm, quiet, "Is there someone else?" He froze. That's when I knew. He didn't lie. I'll give him that much. Maybe he thought the truth would hurt less if he delivered it gently. Maybe he didn't have the energy to deny it anymore. "Yes," he said. Just that. A single word that cracked something inside me. He told me it started a few weeks ago, after the first fight about the venue, after I started pushing back more openly. He said he hadn't planned it, that it just happened. That he was confused. That I had been so angry all the time, and he felt shut out, pushed away. Like it was my fault he made the choice to betray me. I remember staring at him, not crying, not yelling, just empty. Like my body had gone hollow, and I was watching someone else live my life. Then came the worst part. The part that made me feel physically ill. He admitted it was someone his mother introduced him to. She'd set him up. Someone from her country club circle. A girl from a good family, as she liked to say. The kind who wore pastels and pearls and called wine a cheeky little red. The kind who would never choose a theater over a ballroom. The kind who wouldn't challenge her. She just wanted me to meet her, Mark said, like it was nothing. She kept saying we were getting too caught up in our own bubble and that I owed it to myself to see what else was out there. Owed it to himself. Like our entire relationship, our shared years, our plans, our future, was just a phase he was supposed to outgrow once his mother found a shinier, more obedient replacement. I asked him then, voice shaking, "Did you ever even want to marry me? Or was I just the safe bet until your mother found someone more compatible?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. So I ended it. I packed a bag. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't beg him to stay or demand he explain himself more than he already had. I just left. I walked out of the apartment we'd picked together. Past the shelves we'd filled with books, the framed photo of our first vacation, the kitchen we were supposed to have late-night snacks in as husband and wife. I got in my car and drove to my sister's place and collapsed on her couch. The invitations hadn't gone out yet. Thank God. The venue? Still cancelable. We'll lose a small deposit, but most of it can be refunded. But that's not what hurts. It's not losing the wedding. It's not the embarrassment of calling it off, or the logistics, or the questions I'll have to answer from friends and family. It's the realization that I spent months, years, fighting for someone who never once fought for me. Someone who stood by while his mother chipped away at my dignity piece by piece, then handed her the final tool to finish the job. Someone who let me be painted as difficult, emotional, irrational, while he quietly entertained someone else behind my back, someone more appropriate for his family's taste. Someone who looked me in the eye and told me he loved me while already planning a future where I didn't exist. That's what I'm mourning. But underneath the heartbreak, underneath the numbness and the rage and the grief, is a tiny flicker of relief. Relief that I found out now. Relief that I trusted my instincts, that I knew something was wrong and refused to keep swallowing it for the sake of keeping the peace. Relief that I didn't walk down that aisle and into a life where I would have been constantly edited, managed, reshaped into someone more palatable for his family. Because that's not love. That's a performance. And I would rather be alone, aching, angry, betrayed, than shrink myself into a woman who fit their picture-perfect frame. Oh, me.